Welcome to Demystifying Iran. For well over 4 decades, the United States has waged a silent war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. A war not with missiles, but with banks. Not by threatening sovereign nations with soldiers, but by threatening them with secondary sanctions. By coercing countries across the world, its aim has been to break the Iranian nation. A former U.S. official wrote a book on this very strategy, titling it The Art of Sanctions. Given the humanitarian catastrophe and crimes it describes, a much more honest title would have been The Art of Silently Killing Kids. For decades, this economic war has been framed in the language of national security, human rights, terrorism, and non-proliferation, presented as a precision tool targeting only the so-called regime. But when the mask slips, the architects of this war reveal its true purpose: not to target leaders, but to inflict mass suffering on ordinary people. Recently, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent openly acknowledged the role of the U.S. sanctions in destabilizing Iran's economy and fueling public unrest. He gloated and said, "It's worked because in December, their economy collapsed. This is why the people took to the streets. This is economic statecraft. No shots fired. Things are moving in a very positive way here."
What do you want to say about sanctions, something else you've been working on, of course? What are you planning there in terms of Iran and the impact there? Do sanctions actually work? And the same question with regard to 500% secondary sanctions or tariffs on countries who purchase energy products from Russia.
Okay, so two things there. There are Treasury sanctions. And if you look at a speech that I gave at the Economic Club of New York last March, I said that I believe the Iranian currency was on the verge of collapse, that if I were an Iranian citizen, I would take my money out. President Trump ordered Treasury and our OFAC division, Office of Foreign Asset Control, to put maximum pressure on Iran, and it's worked. Because in December, their economy collapsed. We saw a major bank go under. The central bank has started to print money. There is a dollar shortage. They are not able to get imports, and this is why the people took to the street. So this is economic statecraft.
This economic statecraft means collapsing an economy, bankrupting banks, and creating shortages of food and medicine. It is not a conspiracy theory, but a declared strategy, a blueprint for collective punishment. It is an open declaration of war against 90 million people. Weeks ago, a new round of economic warfare began, the first phase of a broader conspiracy. The initial protests following the sudden collapse of the rial were peaceful. However, as Iranian intelligence documented, and as Mossad, former CIA officials, and Israeli television later confirmed, highly trained agents and extremely violent provocateurs were deployed across Iran cities. Public statements from the highest levels in Washington and Tel Aviv openly encouraged violence. From the outset, the plan was to spark protests and then hijack them, igniting chaos. The goal? To fabricate a pretext or a justification for the military aggression they had long threatened. They admit this openly, and they celebrate the suffering caused by sanctions as a positive development. The United States' admission of using sanctions to destabilize Iran is not an anomaly. It is the clearest articulation of a recurring playbook, a weapon designed to bypass armies and starve populations. In our region, this same strategy was used against Iraq under Saddam Hussein throughout the 1990s. For 13 years, a comprehensive international embargo crippled the country. The stated goal was disarmament. The documented outcome was the death of well over 500,000 children from malnutrition and preventable disease, a toll a senior U.S. official, Madeleine Albright, infamously deemed to be worth it. The siege broke Iraqi society, not its leadership, thereby paving the way for invasion.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And, you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
In Syria, well over a decade of devastating unilateral sanctions, culminating in the Caesar Act, denied the government the resources needed to feed its own children. The human cost was the collective punishment of millions, depriving them of heat, clean water, and the chance to rebuild their shattered lives. This engineered poverty was a key factor in the broader strategy to collapse the Assad government. In Libya, a nation destroyed by a NATO-led war for regime change, sanctions have been used to freeze national assets and control oil revenues, perpetuating fragmentation and chaos. The result is a failed state where the population endures constant instability. From Baghdad and Damascus to Tripoli, and of course Cuba and Venezuela, the model has been consistent. Iran is no exception. It is believed that unilateral sanctions imposed by the U.S. and its Western allies are associated with a total of 38 million deaths since 1970. Contrary to the dominant narrative, the architecture of sanctions against Iran is not a calibrated response to its nuclear program. It represents a continuous, evolving tool of pressure wielded by the United States since the 1979 Iranian Revolution. The seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, a response to the U.S. granting the former Shah refuge and plotting against the new government, triggered the first formal sanctions, establishing this form of coercion as a primary instrument of U.S. policy. From there, the sanctions regime systematically expanded. During Saddam's war against Iran, U.S. sanctions were tightened through export controls on dual-use items, severely hampering Iran's economy and its defensive capabilities. Simultaneously, the United States removed Iraq from its list of state sponsors of terrorism and provided it with material support. European allies also assisted Iraq, including in the production and use of chemical weapons. In the 1990s, Clinton expanded sanctions beyond bilateral measures to include extraterritorial laws, which penalized foreign companies for investing in Iran's energy sector. By asserting U.S. legal authority over international firms, this move directly targeted Iran's economic lifeline, isolating it from global capital and markets regardless of other nations' policies. During the Bush and Obama years, pressure reached its zenith. A complex web of multilateral UN and unilateral U.S. sanctions targeted Iran's financial system, oil exports, and central bank, seeking to completely sever its integration into the global economy. Notably, severe sanctions persisted between 2003 and 2005, a period when Iran had voluntarily suspended uranium enrichment as a trust-building measure and was actively negotiating. This pattern continued even after the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, in 2015, which provided limited nuclear-related relief while leaving the core architecture of non-nuclear sanctions largely intact. This continuity demonstrates that Washington's primary concern was not Iran's nuclear program, a program subjected to the most intrusive inspections consistently responsive to international oversight and repeatedly verified as compliant by IAEA reports. Rather, the consistent aim has been to constrain Iran's capacity for independent technological advancement and systematically erode the pillars of its economy. In this light, the nuclear issue has served as the most politically convenient justification for intensifying a pre-existing campaign of collective punishment. The U.S. claims its sanctions are targeted and smart. To understand their true effect, however, we must examine their two core mechanisms: the primary sanction and the more powerful secondary sanction. A primary sanction is direct. It prohibits U.S. persons and companies from doing business with a designated Iranian entity. The true stranglehold, however, comes from the secondary sanctions. These threaten any foreign bank or company anywhere in the world with being cut off from the U.S. financial system and the U.S. dollar, the lifeblood of global trade, if they engage with Iranian entities. The result is systematic. Iran is largely severed from the SWIFT banking network, creating a de facto financial blockade. Faced with catastrophic penalties, international banks and corporations engage in extreme risk aversion or overcompliance. They do not merely avoid blacklisted entities, they freeze all transactions with Iran. While official U.S. policy claims to permit trade in humanitarian goods like food and medicine, the financial mechanism it has created intentionally makes such trade functionally impossible. Banks refuse to process letters of credit. Shipping companies fear insuring cargo. This is not a targeted military strike. The economy itself has become the battlefield. Economic sanctions are not a policy tool that incidentally harms public health. They are a mechanism designed to degrade it systematically. This degradation follows an inescapable three-stage logic, rendering so-called humanitarian exemptions structurally void. When financial channels are blockaded and technology transfers are prohibited, the resulting public health deterioration is not a side effect, it is the objective. First, sanctions directly cripple operational medical capacity. They cause critical shortages of specialized drugs, equipment, and advanced treatments. For cancer patients, this means blocked imports of chemotherapy agents, radiotherapy parts, and diagnostic kits. For children with EB, it means the disappearance of sterile bandages and wound care medications. For those with thalassemia, it becomes a monthly struggle to access life-saving iron-chelating drugs and filtration equipment. For millions with diabetes, the supply of modern insulin, test strips, and pump components is strangled. Second, they comprehensively undermine the social determinants of health. By collapsing purchasing power and disrupting supply chains, sanctions devastate nutrition, housing security, and economic stability, the material foundations of a population's resilience. Third, they constrict long-term development by stifling medical research, professional training, and scientific exchange, ensuring the health crisis is prolonged for generations. The claim of so-called targeted measures collapses here in the pharmacy, in the oncology unit, in the anguish of a child whose treatment is out of reach. The human body itself has become their battlefield. Confronted with this systematic assault, Iran's public health response has been one of forced adaptation. The medical blockade has forged a stark dependency on domestic technological innovation. Consequently, nuclear science, the very pretext for the sanctions, has been pivoted from a geopolitical issue into an urgent clinical tool. It is now essential for producing radioisotopes for early cancer diagnosis and for providing radiotherapy where foreign supply chains have been severed. This reveals the fundamental paradox of the policy. The same nuclear infrastructure that is the focal point of US-led sanctions has become indispensable for mitigating the healthcare crisis those sanctions deliberately create. The sanctions do not manage a threat. They intentionally manufacture a humanitarian emergency and then prohibit the very tools needed to alleviate it. Even Iran's civilian airlines have been deliberately targeted. U.S. sanctions explicitly prohibit the sale, lease, or transfer of any aircraft, parts, or servicing technology to Iran's civil aviation sector, including basic safety critical components. The impact is mechanical and absolute. Airlines cannot legally purchase original parts, forcing them into a shadow market, cannibalizing components from other aging planes, using unverified reverse-engineered parts, or extending maintenance intervals far beyond safe limits. Every takeoff becomes a calculated risk. This is not a hypothetical danger, but a documented record of catastrophe. Aviation safety authorities have directly linked multiple air disasters in past decades to maintenance failures caused by the inability to obtain proper parts and service. These sanctions deliberately engineer systematic risk for a civilian population, attempting to transform every domestic flight into a potential tragedy. Economic warfare has a preferred target beyond infrastructure or institutions. It targets hope, stability, and the future itself. Its most effective method is the annihilation of the middle class, the engineers, teachers, doctors, entrepreneurs, and professionals who form the backbone of any stable society. The primary mechanism is monetary. Sanctions deliberately trigger hyperinflation and currency collapse, eroding purchasing power. Sometimes overnight, a lifetime of prudent savings for a home, a child's education, retirement can be rendered worthless. Beyond devaluation, sanctions impose a financial blockade. They do not merely make trade difficult, they make the fundamental acts of commerce, processing payments, securing credit, conducting international transactions, structurally impossible for ordinary citizens and businesses. The ultimate outcome of this strangling is the hollowing out of a nation's human capital. The engineer is forced to become a taxi driver. The doctor seeks immigration. The brightest students see a future abroad not as an opportunity, but as the only escape from professional oblivion. A country is stripped not only of its wealth, but of its talent, its intellect, and its future. Following the long war with Saddam, Iran witnessed a vital expansion. Millions moved from subsistence into security, gaining not just income but opportunity, the ability to plan, invest in their children's future, and build businesses. This was the tangible outcome of national effort. Then came the reversal. From 2012 onward, as comprehensive sanctions took hold under the Obama regime, the growth of this vital class stagnated. After 2018, with the revival of maximum pressure under Trump, it actively contracted. By the end of the decade, Iran's secure middle class had been reduced by nearly a third compared to its projected path. This mechanism is a pincer movement. High inflation, driven by economic isolation, devours savings and salaries. Simultaneously, financial blockades sever entrepreneurs from global supply chains and markets. The result is not merely poverty in the traditional sense, but the systematic demolition of security and potential. The ultimate cost is measured in lost futures: the student who immigrates, the research project abandoned, the business that never opens. This is the silent, calculated cost of the siege, the foreclosure of a nation's talent, and the conscious unraveling of its social fabric. This is the deliberate outcome. The sanctions regime did not merely slow an economy, it reversed a society's ascent, targeting the very foundation upon which all modern stable nations are built. A consequential, though completely unintended, outcome of the sanctions has been the systematic development of Iran's domestic industrial and scientific capacity. When international procurement was prohibited, first for specific dual-use items, then for a widening range of components, the response was not paralysis, but forced substitution. The broad embargo on industrial parts compelled manufacturers to seek domestic solutions, fostering unprecedented collaboration between production facilities and national research institutions. This adaptation catalyzed a significant structural shift. The number of knowledge-based companies in Iran rapidly grew, indicating a pivot toward a science-based economy. Major infrastructure projects such as the Persian Gulf Star Refinery, the development of the South Pars gas field, and large-scale land reclamation in Khuzestan were completed under the sanctions regime, demonstrating a capacity for complex, capital-intensive engineering. A critical strategic outcome has been the accelerated decoupling of the national economy from hydrocarbon exports, a long-stated policy goal that gained urgent practical necessity from restricted oil sales. Military advancements also have direct civilian applications in sectors like agriculture and disaster management, illustrating a broader pattern of dual-use technological diffusion. This strategic adaptation, however, does not negate the fundamental nature of an evil policy. Extraterritorial sanctions that restrict access to food, medicine, and essential goods are crimes against humanity. By deliberately degrading civilian infrastructure and targeting population welfare, the policy functions as collective punishment, a practice widely condemned under international humanitarian law. Furthermore, the primary strategic objective of the sanctions, to force a fundamental change in Iran's core foreign policies, has utterly failed. Instead, the pressure has achieved the opposite effect, hardening national resolve, accelerating military and technological self-sufficiency, and deepening a narrative of resistance. The policy's most unambiguous result is not political capitulation, but immense human suffering and the entrenchment of the very independent revolutionary posture it sought to undermine. See you next week.